information available on these movies. So basically whatever I found out, that was the Bible on it. It's like no one could dispute it. I mean, in many cases, the only way you could find out any information about the production of an exploitation film was to call the director, or call the producer, or call somebody that was on the set. There was no resources. There were a few famous. I mean, for the big budget ones, yeah, you could find out about it. For The Exorcist, you could find out about that. For The Omen, you could find out about that. But for the lesser titles, the ones that just played the grindhouses and the drive-ins, there was no information on these films. Now, today, there's too much fucking information on all of these films. And so you run into this problem of most of that information circulates on the internet. The thing about the internet is, if there's a factoid that sounds like it could possibly be true, but is absolutely false, it will be repeated 1,000 times on the internet until it's true, until it's accepted as true. And so you have to be really, really, really careful about what information you use on the internet. The main example I would use is budgets of films. How much the film actually costs. The film, they're taking this information out of old issues of Variety and Hollywood Reporter, and so the person selling the film was exaggerating how much he spent on the film, and the person buying the film was exaggerating how little he paid for the film in order to make more money. And so there's never an accurate, anything you read about a budget figure is a lie. It's always a lie. I don't care if it's on IMDb, if it's on Wikipedia, wherever it is, you'll notice it's always a round number. It's like 2 million. It never says the movie costs $1.375 million. It always says it costs 1 million, 1.5 million, 2 million, 3 million, because everybody's lying about what it really costs, And so there's you have all these problems these days researching these movies because there's so much bad information about them. Long answer to a short question, sorry.
I appreciate it, because I'm sitting there watching stuff like The Stuff, Chopping Mall, and I didn't know if you had a team that helped you with finding all the information.
Well, Larry Cohen movies are easy to do because I knew Larry Cohen and I had followed his career closely for years and years and years. In fact, they used to have this spaghetti dinner every Tuesday night at this restaurant called Maddie's on Melrose Avenue in LA, where all the character actors and the exploitation film directors would come and order cheap Italian food, and they had a piano player there and they would sing show tunes. And so, I don't know if you know these guys, like Henry Silva. Henry Silva, the character actor, always played tough guys, and who else was there? Fred Williamson. They would always be at these Tuesday night dinners at Maddie's, and they would, you would look over and suddenly, one of these, the guy always plays a mafia guy. He's over there singing, "All of me. Why not take all of me?" They all wanted to be musical comedy stars, And so I used to go to these dinners, and Larry Cohen was always there. He was always there, and he would tell the greatest stories. He loved character actors, and he loved the whole process of low budget guerrilla filmmaking. And so Larry Cohen movie was easy. What's hard is the one-hit wonder type of movie where the guy, it may be a foreign director, it may be a guy from Hungary who was only in America for 1 year and he made this film and now it's a cult film and he's gone. He's not even in the business anymore and you don't know where he is. And so you have to just sort of piece it together. Sometimes the art director or somebody knows more about the film than anybody else is still alive. The research on these things takes a long, long time.
Gentleman up front.
Favorite movie you've done, and any movie that you want to do but haven't been able to?
Oh, there's many movies. The question is there a movie that we want to show but we can't show? Many movies. When I was at TNT, I had the advantage of Ted Turner was the first guy to buy big movie libraries in the 80s. He was the first guy who figured out that movies, old movies, had a real value. Nobody before that thought old movies had much value on TV. But so Ted Turner bought up all these movie libraries. He bought everything MGM ever made before the year 1982. And so they had this big fat book of stuff that they just owned outright. Today, in the streaming world, all of these, well, there's two things that have happened. One thing is in the streaming world, all this old stuff gets licensed, and so people have different rights to it, you know. And then the second thing that's happened is in the horror world, horror films from the 40s are just as valuable in some cases as horror films made last year. It's the only genre where that's true. That's not true of action films, romantic comedies, dramas, any other kind of film, you know. And so a lot of the classics that in the 80s and 90s, when I was on TV, it was able to, you could just call up Paramount and get any Friday the 13th movie anytime you wanted it. They didn't care about it. They didn't care about Paramount itself. They just didn't care about it. And so now it's changed where you can't get those movies because somebody with big bucks wants them for their big Halloween. You know, they want to show them 3 times in the month of October, and then, you know, and so they pay the big bucks to get the movie. And so we can't always license what we want to license, or we can license it, but you know, only for 1 month. And so you can show it, but then it can't be permanently a part of the streaming, you know. And so we have to make a decision about, you know, what do we really want to pay for? Another long answer to a short question. So sorry.
Front here.
Yeah, Joe, what was it like interviewing Wes Craven in 1997? Because he was one of my favorite.
What was it like interviewing Wes Craven in 1997? Wes Craven didn't really enjoy interviews. He didn't do many interviews. He was not a particularly good interview subject unless you could trigger him somehow. And so I managed to trigger him on a couple of subjects. But as I recall, you know, once I don't even think I ever interviewed him in the studio. I think one time I interviewed him with just me and him, with me writing answers on a notebook. And then another time, I think we did an interview in his house in Hollywood Hills. But he was a very reserved guy. He was a professor. I mean, he started out as I think an English professor in some little liberal arts school in the Northeast. And also, I mean, many people don't know this about Wes Craven, but he grew up in a strict Baptist household. That, you know, no dancing, no movies. So he didn't watch a movie until he was 21 years old, and that was after he graduated from that school, whatever that Baptist school is that Billy Graham went to in Illinois. I don't remember the name of it. And so I think a lot of Wes Craven's hostilities that came out in his writing were part of this like repressed Baptist upbringing, but he still had that reserve. You know, he said a very interesting thing. He said that the characters in The Hills Have Eyes are basically his family. You know, that family from Cleveland, that's basically his family. And so that tells you something, you know, about what he was dealing with. And I guess he enjoyed watching him get killed off. But he was a very interesting guy, very intriguing guy, but very in his head, a very cerebral, intellectual guy.
Up front here and then back there.
So the first time I ever watched I Spit on Your Grave, it was like kind of terrifying how real it was. Then I bought a DVD with your commentary on it. You actually made that into like a comedy. It was so freaking hilarious. Would you
Yeah.
ever like go around like how you're doing with the Redneck Save Hollywood and show that movie and do commentary to it?
You know, I have done live commentary for screenings of I Spit on Your Grave. I think I've done that twice. Here's the thing about I Spit on Your Grave. Camille Keaton, the lead actress, was so good. Her performance was so good that it covered up the bad performances of the rapists. And so when you're hearing those screams of Camille Keaton, you're not noticing that the goofy faces on the guys that are raping her, you'll see what I mean if you ever watch it again. If you turn off the sound, just turn off the sound and watch those guys. You know, they are totally unbelievable. What's believable is Camille Keaton's agony, and so yeah, it had quite a few. I mean, the lead redneck, whose name I forgot, he was using a fake name in the credits, and I've forgotten his real name, but the guy who gets his penis cut off, you know, that guy was a great actor. Okay, the other three guys not so much, you know, and so I was always amazed, you know, why it ruined Mayor Zarki's career, and why it was banned, and you know why that movie was picked on so much, and poor Mayor Zarki, he thought he was making a feminist statement, you know, an anti-violence against women statement, and I think he was just amazed that suddenly he was the most hated man in America for this movie that Siskel and Ebert wrongly accused of supporting rapists, and Ebert especially. He claimed that he went to a screening where people were cheering the rapist. I never saw a screening like that. I've gone to screenings where there's uncomfortable laughter, you know, which is always a little unnerving, you know, where that nervous laughter that sometimes people have when they don't know how to react to something. I thought the film was unfairly criticized. Now, is it a great film? No, it's not a great film. It doesn't have a very good structure. It's not very, you know, it could have done with a couple of rewrites on that script, but it certainly didn't deserve to be the most censored film in the last half century. So, the only reason I did the DVD commentary is that the guy who had the rights to it, a guy named Vinny Bancalari, who owned Elite Entertainment, he called me up and he said, are you the guy that did the favorable review of I Spit on Your Grave? And I said, yeah. And he says, would you do the commentary? And I said, yeah. And he says, because you're the only person that ever did a favorable review of I Spit on Your Grave. And so that's how I started doing commentary tracks, as I was asked to do that one. That was the very first one I ever did. And then I became friends with Mayor Zarki because he called me up and said, hey, did you do this commentary track? Yeah. And he said, thank you, man. Thank you. And I actually did the commentary track for the sequel, which just came out last year, which is, it's tough getting through the sequel. It's like, it's a little long, you know, but it has its moments, you know, so in fact, that's the longest commentary track I ever did. It's like, that's like 2 hours and 20 minutes of nonstop talking. We just ran the tape. We never even stopped. I consider that a personal accomplishment just because I didn't know I could talk that long.
Gentleman over here in the blue mask.
Married with Children is one of my favorite TV shows. I was wondering if you have any specific memories of working on that show that you could talk about.
Yeah, I remember. He's asking about 2 appearances I made on Married with Children as Billy Ray Whitnap, the exterminator. Well, what I remember about it is that the 2 creators of the show, whose names escape me right now, but were really nice guys, who they invited me. They wrote a character and they thought, hey, Joe Bob would be good for this part, and so they invited me to be part of it. I'd never seen how they put together a sitcom before, and so I had a great time. By the time I was on the show, it was, it was some advanced season. It wasn't like near the beginning of it. They had been doing the show for a while. So they all came in like it was just going to work, another week, another week, another show. And so I met everybody, and they were all very friendly and nice, and that's basically what I remember about it. The exciting thing to me was it was filmed or taped in Gower Gulch. Gower Gulch was a famous place in film history. It was where the original silent westerns were made, and there was a studio, the cheapest studio in Hollywood. It had been there for 80 years or something, and right there on Sunset Boulevard. And it was like, man, we're making a show in Gower Gulch. That was just cool to me. I don't think anybody else cared one bit about it. but I was like, oh, this is great. I'm going to the same place where Tom Mix made westerns and stuff. So that was the cool thing about it for me. But everybody on the show was very relaxed and nice to work with. But again, they were like, for them, it was like going to work, Here's what you do on Monday, here's what you do on Tuesday, here's what you do on Wednesday, here's what you do on Thursday. And then on Friday, you film it twice, and then you're done. You come back on Monday morning. And so I'd never seen like an assembly line type sitcom operation like that before.
Purple Mask and Blue Jacket.
We seem to be like at an impasse with movies these days where big studios like Disney and other ones are buying up franchises and only certain things are getting on the screens. But on the other hand, we have like indie things like the movie Host that they made during the pandemic with just a couple cameras and everything. Do you think there's going to be a balance point at some point where there's going to be more indie films that are going to get their chance to be out there and get back onto the big screens?
So the question, if you couldn't hear it in the back, was has horror been taken over by big ticket remakes, and is there going to be a place for indie films on the screen? The indie films are all available. They're all available. They're streaming, and you can find them. I mean, and there's actually more indie horror films being made today than probably at any time in history. It's sad that so many of them disappear without much hoopla. I try to be a good curator and point people to the ones that are worthy of our time, and some of the really good ones don't last. As far as the remake situation, that's always been a part of Hollywood. As soon as something is identified as a franchise or something that can make money in multiple incarnations, that will always be done, and that's being done with horror because horror became popular. Probably horror started to become popular at the moment that The Shape of Water won the Academy Award for Best Picture. Popular with big bucks investors and studios. So that, if you can have a movie like Shape of Water that not only makes hundreds of millions of dollars, but wins the Academy Award, therefore you can talk about it at your cocktail party, then everyone wants to be, in the horror business. And if you'll notice, every major studio is in the horror business. Now, the franchises for, the franchise for Halloween is not owned by a studio. It's Jason Blumhouse has that franchise. And he has a deal with Universal to release it, but that's an indie guy. I mean, he's a big indie guy, but that's an indie guy who took over the Halloween franchise. And actually, John Carpenter did not want to have any more. He didn't want to be associated with any more Halloween stuff. And Jason Blum talked him into it. So we had Halloween 2018. And now we're going to have Halloween Kills, and then we're going to have, what's the last one called? Halloween Ends. Which, of course, that's a lie. And those are, I don't know what the budget, I've never looked it up, and I'm sure that no one would tell me the true figure of what the budgets are. But that's an indie guy who has enough reassurance from the public that people will go see it, that he's sort of making a bigger budget film. He's not making a huge budget film, he's not making a Marvel budget type film, but he's making a much bigger budget film than he would be happy with if it was any other franchise. And so we now have indie guys. I mean, David Gordon Green, who directs those Halloween films, he's an indie guy. He's like he made those, his first 5, 6, 7, 8 films were mumblecore. I mean, they weren't mumblecore, they were better than mumblecore, but, he was hanging out with, Harmony Korine or whoever they hang out with. So, so that's an indie guy, moving into horror franchise. And a lot of guys have been. Lee Wanell is another example of that. Even The Invisible Man. The Invisible Man was a franchise that Universal didn't really give a shit about, and so they let Lee Wanell do it. And so